afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our conference, Europe for Notaries, Notaries for Europe. I have the pleasure to greet the panelists of the second panel, which is about the legal certainty and trust in digital world and the lessons learned from the COVID crisis. This gives us the opportunity, as said in the beginning of our meeting, to exchange with the European Commission about the future of the judicial sector and about the most modern future of the judicial sector. I'd like to hand over to journalist Samuel Stolton, who is going to moderate this panel. And I would like to welcome him as well to CNUE here in Brussels. Welcome, Samuel.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you very much. Pleased to be here. And good afternoon, everyone. And a warm welcome live from Brussels for what I hope will be a very engaging panel discussion on the subject of legal certainty and trust in the digital world, lessons from the COVID crisis. As Raul said, my name is Samuel Stolton. I'm the technology editor at the EU news policy platform Euractiv here in Brussels. So, over the course of this year, we've all had to radically realign our lives to the new reality brought on by the coronavirus crisis. For the most part, this has meant rapidly migrating our personal and professional lives online. In the judicial world, this has presented a series of challenges, but also opportunities. For their part, notaries across the EU have had to quickly adapt to this new context. And in Brussels, the Commission has also published its digitalisation of justice communication, aiming to support and foster the uptake and deployment of digital tools across all levels of the judiciary. Well, today, to discuss this very pertinent issue and more, I'm very pleased indeed to be joined by a stellar panel, including Christian Nicolaou, who is Head of Unit E-Justice at the European Commission. We're also joined by Merle Saar Johansson, President of the Estonian Chamber of Notaries. We have David Ambrosiano, President of the Higher Council of the French Notariat. We have Jens Bormann, President of the Federal Chamber of German Civil Law Notaries. And we have Alvaro Lucchini Matteo, a notary in Madrid, Spain. We're going to begin this panel with some short opening statements from our speakers before embarking on our discussion. And you, of course, are also encouraged to participate by submitting any questions you have in the Q&A functionality of the Zoom platform. And we shall pick those questions up towards the end of the session. So, without further ado, let's kick off with our opening statements. And for this, I'd first like to turn to Christian Nicolaou, representing the European Commission. Christian.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation and to offer me to take part of this very extremely up-to-date topic, digitalization in justice. As always, I'm honored to be part of the conferences that are organized by CNUE, one of the long-lasting partner of the Commission. Last week, the Commission adopted a package of initiatives to modernize the EU justice systems. The pillars of this new package are the communication on the digitalization of justice in the EU, the e-Codex regulation, and the new strategy on European judicial training, about which my colleague Emmanuel Cretin has spoken a little earlier. This digital justice toolbox aims at further supporting member states to move ahead their national justice systems toward the digital era and at improving EU cross-border judicial cooperation between competent authorities. The toolbox contains measures for financial support, new legislative initiatives, enhanced monitoring and exchange of best practices regarding the digitalization of justice and the use of tangible IT tools such as e-Codex. The legislative proposal on e-Codex provides the system with a legal base and a sustainable solution for its future operational management by EU-LISA as of mid-2023. As regards the European judicial training, the Commission equips judges, prosecutors, and justice professionals for the challenges of the 21st century, such as digitalization. It further aims at promoting a common European judicial culture based on the rule of law, fundamental rights, and mutual trust. As I said in the opening of my introductory statement, I am very happy to be part of this panel. Digitalization is one of the most actual topics of the day, and I would say a long due one. It was this unfortunate crisis that has bring it to the fore, but now since we are speaking about it and we are so much depending on digitalization, it is the time to act.
Christian, for your opening statement there. Some particularly interesting comments on cross-border judiciary cooperation, and perhaps a bit later on we can explore how digital tools can facilitate that process a bit better. Now for her opening statement, I'd like to turn to Merle Saar Johansson, President of the Estonian Chamber of Notaries.
Thank you, and I'm happy to be the part of this panel. I would urge the European notaries to be innovative and not to be afraid of changes. Obviously, technological development is rapid and irreversible, and we cannot expect that the notaries can continue working in the way we have been during the past centuries. The focus should be on providing the best service to our customers using contemporary means. It is also clear that innovation seems intimidating because it brings us out of our comfort zones and forces us to spend energy to find new solutions and learning something new. But I am convinced that after overcoming the first difficulties and getting more accustomed to technology, we will acknowledge that the innovations have made our lives and our clients' lives easier. For Estonian notaries, the introduction of new IT systems as well as remote authentication once seemed unknown and scary. Many battles were fought here. However, today, none of us can imagine working without them. Due to the changes, notaries have become more accessible for clients. Transactions are being concluded faster, and this ultimately enables us to strengthen our position in the society and reduce the arguments of the notaries being the bottlenecks in economic market. Of course, we must always preserve essential features of the notarial profession when applying new solutions in order to ensure legal certainty. But this can also be done in such a way that the service is convenient for the client. So let's think out of box, but in a secure way, and help and encourage each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Merle, for your opening statement there, and some really interesting comments, particularly with regards to innovation sometimes seeming intimidating for certain citizens and also notaries across the EU. And I suppose the question really is there, how do we establish and substantiate a sense of trust both within the citizens and within notaries across the EU with regards to the use and deployment of digital tools? I'd now like to turn to David Ambrosiano, President of the Higher Council of the French Notariat. David, la parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour à tous mes collègues. Je rejoins complètement les propos de la présidente estonienne. Aujourd'hui, l'acte authentique électronique, la visioconférence, n'est plus une option, c'est une obligation. On ne reviendra pas en arrière. Il faut, je pense, en être parfaitement conscient. Et la présidente estonienne l'a très bien dit, les notaires n'existent parce qu'ils sont utiles à la société. Si nous cessons d'être utiles à la société, nous n'existerons plus. Et donc c'est pour cette raison que ces outils technologiques ne sont plus aujourd'hui une option. Alors, je vais peut-être vous donner un petit retour sur la façon dont les choses se sont faites dans notre pays, en France, puisque nous avons eu un arrêt brutal le 16 mars dernier avec un confinement strict, une impossibilité totale de recevoir les clients dans nos études. Et nous avons pu mettre en place un acte à distance de manière assez rapide parce que les développements étaient déjà effectués très en amont. En fait, depuis 10 ans, pour pouvoir faire de l'acte à distance, pour faire simple, il faut tout d'abord faire de l'acte authentique électronique. Il n'est pas possible de faire de l'acte à distance sans acte authentique électronique. Or, cela maintenant fait presque 10 ans que les notaires en France pratiquent l'acte authentique électronique et on ne peut le faire que si on s'est doté des outils nécessaires pour y arriver et notamment un système d'archivage électronique totalement sécurisé et garanti collectivement par la profession. Donc ça, c'est la première chose, un acte qui soit électronique. La deuxième, c'est de disposer d'un système de contrôle de l'identité, de l'identification du client, mais également de signature électronique. Et c'est ce qu'il nous a fallu faire en un temps très très court à l'occasion de ce confinement. Et enfin, il faut aussi disposer d'un système de visioconférence. En l'occurrence, le notariat français a fait le choix d'un système de visioconférence totalement sécurisé. C'est un système de visioconférence qui est agréé par le notariat. Et bien entendu, pour finir, il nous faut un décret, il faut un texte qui autorise le notaire à faire tout cela. Donc, il a fallu en un temps très court, avec le ministère de la Justice, arriver à produire un texte législatif qui réponde non seulement à la possibilité d'effectuer des actes à distance, avec un système de visioconférence sécurisé, un système de contrôle d'identité, de vérification de l'identification du client et enfin de signature électronique. Et tout ça a été possible parce que, à la fois, nous avions déjà commencé les développements avant même le confinement, il y a plus d'1 an et demi, et nous avions visité beaucoup de pays. Nous avions visité d'ailleurs l'Autriche, l'Estonie, la Lettonie, le Canada francophone. Je tiens à remercier tous ces pays amis qui ont pu nous apporter aussi leur expérience et leur expertise sur cette question, ce qui nous a permis aussi, nous, d'avancer beaucoup plus vite. Sur le système de visioconférence, lorsque le confinement est arrivé, nous n'avions que 40% des études qui étaient équipées de ce système agréé. Seul système pour pouvoir justement recevoir une signature électronique. Et nous avons déployé de manière très très forte, après le premier confinement, ce système de visioconférence. Et aujourd'hui, c'est 75% des études qui sont équipées de ce système. Ce qu'il faut retenir, c'est aussi le bel élan de solidarité qu'il y a eu entre les notaires français au mois de mars et au mois d'avril, car ceux qui n'étaient pas équipés de visioconférence ont pu bénéficier des systèmes de visioconférence d'autres notaires qui leur ont prêté leur salle de visioconférence afin que les actes puissent être reçus. Et je pense que cette période de crise, qui était une période difficile pour tout le monde, a permis également de manifester une belle solidarité entre les notaires. Et je pense que c'est un côté positif que l'on peut retrouver aussi dans cette crise. Donc globalement, la profession a bien résisté à la fois au premier confinement, mais également au confinement que nous vivons toujours aujourd'hui. Lors de ce deuxième confinement qui a commencé le 30 octobre dernier, il n'était pas aussi strict puisque les notaires ont été autorisés à recevoir des clients dans leurs études pour signer des actes, mais uniquement lorsqu'un échange dématérialisé n'était pas possible. Et un décret du 20 novembre dernier a réintroduit l'acte par comparution à distance, mais en le limitant uniquement aux procurations authentiques. Contrairement au premier confinement, où il était possible de signer quasiment n'importe quel acte par comparution à distance, l'État a souhaité limiter cela aux procurations authentiques. Et cette fois-ci, il n'y a plus de limite de durée dans le temps. C'est on va dire un changement législatif qui reste aujourd'hui gravé dans les textes et qui permet aux notaires de recevoir, aux notaires français, des procurations authentiques à distance. Voilà ce que je pouvais dire sur l'expérience française et je serai prêt à répondre, bien entendu, à vos questions.
Thank you very much, David, there for your opening statement. And I'm hoping a bit later on we can get into the granular level of the decree that the French introduced in November in a bit more detail. Next up, we have Jens Bormann, President of the Federal Chamber of German Civil Law Notaries. Jens. The microphone, Jens, please.
The microphone, okay. I hope you can hear me now.
Great.
Can you hear me? Perfect. So thank you very much. Well, thank you for giving me the floor and the opportunity to participate in this very interesting panel on legal certainty and trust in the digital world. In Germany, we have also set up a platform for digital authentication, which is highly secure and I think most advanced. We will not only read or check the electronic signatures, the EIDs, but we will also read out the picture from the new European EIDs, which are based on the German EID, basically under the new EU regulation on picture IDs. And we will read out the photograph and the biometric details of this photograph. And so we have a kind of double check security. We will check the photograph as well as the EID. And since the German Chamber of Federal Notaries is a trusted authority for electronic IDs and signatures for now 13 years, since 2007, we can also issue ad hoc electronic signatures for our clients to sign those deeds. And all this will become operational next year within the implementation of the new company law package directive. But if you allow me, I would like to address some more fundamental questions within this context of digitalization. In Germany, we are always open to new technologies. We have also, for example, developed recently a blockchain tool to check the validity of powers of attorneys. And of course, we compare the different ways to achieve the same legal goal or to achieve legal goals, be it centralized database technology, be it distributed ledger technology within the blockchain. I think what matters in the digital world is not so much the technology which is applied. Technology has to be efficient, of course, but I think which is really the central point is the question who controls this technology. The question is whether we want to leave the control in the hands of private platforms like Google or Amazon or mining farms in China or wherever in the world, or whether we want to retain some control in Europe, some control by the democratically legitimized member states and by some, well, public institutions like the notaries. And therefore, I think we have to address the broader issue whether the digitalization of law will be also a complete privatization or whether we will keep institutions like notaries or other trusted intermediaries in the process. We have a long history of creating trust, and I think we have to continue this history also in the digital age. Second point, from my point of view, is that we should not underestimate when we speak about digitalization, the continuing need for individual legal advice and for the individual drafting of contracts. Of course, we are very much in favor of online authentication and remote authentication. However, we believe that individual legal advice and the individual drafting of contracts cannot be replaced by completely automated processes. We have to maintain the rule of law and we have to maintain the individual access to justice. And therefore, I think the task will be for all of us to combine such new technologies, remote authentication, blockchain, whatever, under a kind of public control with reliable institutions like notaries and with the individual access of the citizens and enterprises to law and to individually set up contracts and individual solutions which meets the needs of real life and the needs of the economy and well, of the citizens of our European member states. And therefore, even in the digital world, we have to maintain a human face, and we should never forget about the human needs of our clients. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jens, for your opening statement there. On the subject of investment, actually, of course, just down the road from us at the moment here in Brussels, we have EU leaders currently negotiating over the multi-annual financial framework and the Recovery and Resilience Fund, for which 20% of that package has been provisionally allocated for digital tools. So it will be interesting to see whether that actually comes through and whether that type of financing can help the broader digitalisation of the notary sector a bit further on down the line. Jens made some really important comments there as well on the subject of digital sovereignty, European digital sovereignty, I may add, which is of course a priority of the President von der Leyen, and we'll get more into detail about that a bit later on as part of our panel discussion. But thank you, Jens, for your opening statement there. And finally, I'd like to turn to Alvaro Lucchini Mateo, our notary representing Spain.
For the invitation and for the introductory words. Notaries had, before the burst of the pandemic, already initiated a process of internal reflection about the possibility to admit, in certain cases, remote personal interaction between the parties and the notary, using technical means of audiovisual communications instead of physical immediate presence. The COVID crisis has accelerated this process. The conclusion is that physical presence is not a goal in itself, but an instrument for the authentication. It is for sure the best instrument, allowing the richest and deepest degree of communication, but it's not the only one in the field of personal interaction. In certain cases, or for specified legal transactions, a remote personal interaction by means of video conference between the notary and the parties can provide sufficient assurance for the notarial authentication of the identity, legal capacity, and informed consent of the parties to the transaction. The COVID crisis has also proved the importance of the services provided by notaries for the economy, as they ensure the validity, clear evidence, and enforceability of legal transactions. Therefore, the notarial public service has been declared in Spain an essential service, and all notarial offices have mandatorily remained open during the state of emergency, only for the attention of urgent cases. But mind please that loans financing business activity and their collaterals were included in this concept. The emergency legislation passed during the pandemic has opened the gate to a distance personal interaction without physical presence in some fields of the notarial activity. For instance, the possibility for companies to hold during the state of emergency general shareholders and board directors meetings by means of video conference, including the participation by the same means of the notary in charge of drafting the minutes. The Spanish National Chamber of Notaries has asked the Spanish government to amend the laws in order to admit the use of video conference instead of physical presence in some other fields, such as the constitution of private limited companies and the other digital procedures required by the European Directive 1151 of last year, powers of attorney for litigation, revocation of all kinds of powers of attorney, last wills in time of epidemic, and certain types of loan agreements, among others. A recent proposal was presented to the Ministry of Justice on April 15th as the first wave of the pandemic was reaching its peak. This proposal is now under study and discussion by the Spanish government. In the meantime, the Spanish notaries have developed the digital tools required to bring it to practice, including the applications required for the implementation of the European Directive 1151 on digital tools and procedures in the field of company law. This task has been undertaken by our own technological company named Untitled, which is wholly owned by the Spanish National Chamber of Notaries. We are prepared, but technology is not enough. Notaries perform public functions and are linked to public service. Contrary to other legal professions, we cannot decide on our own the way we fulfill our role. Several laws have to be amended before these new digital tools are implemented in practice in Spain.
Thank you very much for your opening statement there, Alvaro. And the comment that technology is not enough is very interesting when we speak about the importance of upskilling and reskilling as well. Indeed, earlier on in the day, we had another Commission representative who spoke about this, and perhaps we can touch more on those efforts in terms of reskilling the judiciary and notary workers and professionals a bit later on as part of our panel discussion. Of course, indeed, whether or not we need a human-centric approach to digital capacity building is another subject that I think we should come back to a bit later on as well. We're going to jump straight in now with our panel discussion. And I'd like to turn first to Christian, really, just to get an overview, really, about in what ways the COVID crisis highlighted the importance of rapid digitalisation in the justice sector. I'm wondering, Christian, what trends we saw during the crisis that makes this need more necessary, particularly at the current time?
Thank you very much for the question, Samuel. It's clear that digital became one of the main alternatives to physical presence for several procedures in the judiciary. And there are some things that we have seen. First of all, before the crisis, there was a big reluctance to adopting digital technology when it came to judiciary. Well, this crisis forced everybody to be able to accept the digital technology, not only as a pertinent alternative to physical presence, but in many cases, to the only alternative of physical presence. And of course, many people are telling, okay, this crisis hopefully will end sooner rather than later, so we can get back to our normal way of life. True. However, digital tools also have the advantage of being faster, of being cheaper, and also of being more secure. Also, what we can see in Europe, and that also before the pandemic, it's a great mobility of the population. So it is not only the next door notary or the next door office of some sort to which the citizen has to relate to, but sometimes there are offices that are on the other side of Europe. So there also being able to do digital procedures not only saves money for the European citizens, but also increases the speed and even the reliability. Also, before the crisis, everybody tried to tailor as much as possible the digital means to the existing way of doing things. However, the moment the crisis came, everybody adapted to the digital tools available. And what we can see is that in the sectors that were up in the trend with the technological development, digital or not, this crisis had lesser impact than on other where this was not possible. So I would say that we should be all learning from these effects of this crisis, because also the fact that people are not driving for tens of kilometers every day to go to work, or even to make physical meetings all across Europe is not necessarily something that doesn't have its positive aspects. On the other hand, nothing can replace human interaction. And after 9 months of this crisis, probably this is the overarching feeling. However, once again, digital has provided an alternative to that as well.
Wonderful, thank you,
Up
Chris.
to you, Samuel.
Thank you very much. You made some interesting points there about the importance of cross-border notary cooperation, and as part of the communication last week, the Commission did also publish its mapping exercise that I'm hoping we can get to a bit later on in order to probe the importance of greater harmonisation of notary services across the EU. You also mentioned there that citizens have really had to accept digital technologies from the outset of this COVID crisis. And in one country in particular, France, they had to accept it quite early on because the government adopted such a strict lockdown. David, I would like to turn to you now to maybe ask you a bit more specifically about what happened in France. And of course, earlier this year, the government introduced a decree that allowed notaries to carry out their business remotely. Perhaps you could tell us a bit more about how the lockdown period in France affected your work and the adaptations that had to be made by notaries all across your country.
Merci. Comme je vous le disais tout à l'heure, il a fallu effectivement se réadapter très rapidement pour signer des comparutions, des actes par comparution à distance. Et il a fallu se réadapter parce que, certes, nous connaissions déjà l'acte authentique électronique, mais nous ne disposions pas d'un outil de signature électronique à distance. L'outil de signature électronique qui existe actuellement en France, c'est dans l'office du notaire. Et l'outil de signature n'était autorisé par la réglementation française. C'est celui du plus haut niveau du règlement EIDAS, et le niveau qualifié, n'est proposé que par une seule société. Et la société aujourd'hui qui s'appelle DocuSign. Et je rejoins les propos de Jens Bormann sur cette question. Se pose véritablement une problématique de souveraineté numérique. Accepterons-nous demain de livrer un outil d'identification et de signature électronique à une société qui est soumise au droit américain? Dans l'urgence, il a bien fallu s'y soumettre lors du premier confinement, mais ce n'est pas l'objectif, en tout cas, du notariat français. Et je rejoins complètement les propos de Jens Bormann sur cette question. Nous devons, nous notaires, pouvoir assumer notre souveraineté numérique. Dans un monde numérique, le besoin de confiance demain de nos clients sera encore beaucoup plus grand. Et les notaires auront véritablement leur rôle à jouer en la matière, tout autant qu'ils l'avaient actuellement dans le monde physique. Donc je ne pense pas que le monde numérique sera de nature à affaiblir le rôle du notaire. Je pense au contraire, bien au contraire, que le rôle du notaire sera complètement légitimé dans un monde numérique qui nécessite encore plus de confiance que dans un monde physique. Pour la question de je voudrais revenir aussi sur la question de Jens, soulevée par Jens, sur la proximité avec nos clients. C'est un élément qui est essentiel. Il faut bien admettre que l'acte par comparution à distance ne remplace rien. Il ne vient que s'ajouter à toutes les autres méthodes, toutes les autres façons que nous avons de rencontrer nos clients. L'acte par comparution à distance, il crée simplement une nouvelle proximité avec nos clients, une proximité à distance. Mais il ne remplace rien parce qu'il y a certains rendez-vous qui portent sur des sujets parfois un peu délicats, qui nécessitent une certaine confidentialité, mais qui nécessitent surtout une humanité, implique de pouvoir recevoir nos clients de manière physique. Donc on ne remplace rien, on vient simplement ajouter quelque chose de plus. Comme j'ai dit déjà beaucoup de choses tout à l'heure sur l'acte par comparution à distance, si vous souhaitez que j'explore ou j'approfondisse un petit peu, n'hésitez pas à me le dire. Et je pense avoir peut-être été assez complet et je pourrais répondre, si vous le souhaitez, à vos questions.
Thank you very much, David, for your response there. And the flow of discussion has actually taken a bit of a political turn now with the reference to European digital sovereignty. And of course, in France, both Emmanuel Macron and your junior digital minister, Cédric O, have been great proponents of the importance of European digital sovereignty. But of course, this principle was first originated from the Commission, just down the road from us in the Berlaymont now, as part of President von der Leyen's term, and she highlighted the importance of European digital sovereignty in one of her very first speeches in the European Parliament as well. Jens, you referred to European digital sovereignty a bit earlier on. What does this mean in practice in the notary world, and how exactly can it be achieved?
I think it's a kind of a multi-term question.
Alors, il faut bien distinguer.
Peut-être David,
David, vous pouvez répondre si vous voulez.
Vas-y Jens, vas-y.
Et après Jens.
Okay, so well, I will take the floor. I think it's a multi-term question. On the one hand, we have to keep a kind of technical control, which means, for example, that if we provide blockchain technology, then it's the question who has the writing rights, who controls the blockchain, who can switch it off, whether this should be a notary or a public institution, or, for example, a mining farm in China. And I think this is really important. These are the issues we have to address. If we use clouds, these clouds have to be reliable. That's why in Germany we built our own notarial cloud, for example. Or the question is whether we can use some clouds which are run by the government or which are run by government-controlled agencies. Then data protection is, of course, a very important issue. We have the duty of confidentiality, and this confidentiality has also to be kept in the European digital world. And I think we have to keep things transparent. With digital processes, it's always a kind of question that these digital processes can be for the users rather opaque. You see the browser, you see the website, but you don't know what's going on behind this website. And I think our task is to build up or to continue to develop electronic structures which are reliable, which are transparent, and on which our clients can rely and can trust in. That's our task. And I think, therefore, we have to build up an own European infrastructure. Otherwise, we will necessarily end up, as David Ambrosiano said, under American or whatever sovereignty. And I think we really have to keep, especially in the legal world, a European framework, and we have to defend the values of the European rule of law and of the of confidentiality and of a kind of equal justice and equal access to justice for our citizens, also technically. That's of, I think, utmost importance.
Great, thank you, Jens. David, would you like to jump in there and add your comments on European digital sovereignty?
Tout à fait. Je pense que sur la question de la souveraineté numérique, alors qu'elle soit européenne ou au niveau des États ou au niveau d'une profession comme peut l'être le notariat, il faut bien distinguer les outils des données. On utilise tous aujourd'hui des téléphones portables qui ne sont pas forcément d'une nationalité européenne. Pourtant, ces téléphones portables arrivent à communiquer entre eux et vous avez des données qui sont hébergées sur ces téléphones. Vous utilisez tous, nous utilisons tous des systèmes de messagerie comme par exemple Outlook. L'important, ce n'est pas l'outil en lui-même, mais c'est où se trouve l'hébergement des données, qui les paramètre, qui les maîtrise et qui, lorsque l'on a fait tout ça, peut déterminer le droit applicable à ces données en cas de contentieux. Je vais vous donner un exemple. Lorsque nous avons dû mettre au point un système de visioconférence sécurisé, là nous avions eu le temps, puisque c'est maintenant, ça fait 5 ans que nous avons ce système, nous avons fait appel à une société américaine qui est la société LifeSize. Mais la société LifeSize a travaillé en marque blanche avec nous, c'est-à-dire que nous avons un contrat qui soumet nos relations à la loi française et toutes les données sont hébergées en France dans le cloud du notariat, paramétrées par le notariat, et il est impossible, puisque ces données sont chiffrées, d'être accessibles notamment par le Cloud Act américain. Donc je pense qu'il faut bien faire la distinction entre des outils que nous n'arriverons peut-être pas dans un temps très court à recréer à un niveau européen, du droit et de l'hébergement des données. La souveraineté peut tout aussi bien passer par une contractualisation avec des acteurs qui peuvent être étrangers, comme américains ou autres. L'important, c'est où se trouve l'hébergement des données et quel droit est applicable.
Wonderful. Thank you, David, there for your comments. Yes, I mean, of course, there has been a lot of concern on the continent with regards to the extraterritorial reach of US surveillance law, and you referenced the Cloud Act there, and that has been a very pertinent subject here in Brussels for some years, only exacerbated, I think, by the recent European Court of Justice ruling during the Schrems II case that, of course, when EU data goes abroad, specifically to the United States, it's not secure up to the standard that the GDPR is supposed to secure it by. So a lot of geopolitical questions around the concept of European digital sovereignty there. Of course, sovereignty is also relevant in the cybersecurity world, and one of Europe's success stories, I would say, for cybersecurity has been Estonia. And maybe we can turn to Merle now, and perhaps I can ask you, Merle, how important is sufficient cybersecurity standards in the day-to-day work that you carry out as a notary, particularly in the context of the coronavirus crisis?
Thank you for the question. Cybersecurity is clearly especially important in the work of notaries, because we work with personal data and enable the transfer of valuable objects. We do the majority of our work electronically. Thus, we need to be extremely careful about the security of our IT systems. Luckily, Estonian notaries have had the opportunity to base our systems on our country's high-functioning e-government infrastructure, reliable digital identity, and mandatory security baseline for all government authorities. We have developed our systems together with the IT department of the Estonian Ministry of Justice. Our IT systems have been developed to meet the Estonian public sector security standards from the very start and have been audited accordingly. Also, the Estonian Chamber of Notaries is the owner of our IT systems. Our servers are managed and user support provided by the same IT department of the Ministry of Justice on the basis of a cooperation agreement. And as stated in Estonia's 2019 cybersecurity strategy for Estonia, cybersecurity does not mean protecting technological solutions. It means protecting digital society and the way of life of whole people here. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Merle. I'd like to bring in Alvaro here now to speak about various developments in Spain and in the ongoing process of digitalisation of the notaries in Spain. Your country has built a secure platform to access notary services called the Citizen Gateway. Could you tell us a bit more about this initiative and whether the data or perhaps the security protocols that you put in place to ensure that some of that very sensitive data is protected?
The Notarial Citizen Gateway is one of the new digital tools I mentioned before. It gives citizens and businesses the possibility to initiate and follow distance proceedings with any Spanish notary via a secure electronic channel. It has been designed in order to carry out all the future digital proceedings coming out of the amendments of the current laws and regulations, including the implementation of EU Directive 1151 of last year on digital tools and procedures in the field of company law. It is intended as an electronic seat of the Spanish notaries, open to citizens and businesses, not only to public authorities as it was before, providing not only secure remote personal interaction, but also the external appearance of a secure communication, something that cannot be provided by notaries acting on their own on the internet. It is built on other tools that have already proved their efficiency. Since the year 2001, every single notary in Spain holds a highly secure, qualified electronic signature supplied by our own technological company. All the Spanish notaries are linked by a virtual private network, connecting them all mutually to each other, and also to the chambers of notaries, tax offices, cadastre, real estate registries, business registries, and many other public offices and official databases and networks. An online notarial platform named Signo is already used for both internal communication between notaries and provision of services to citizens. All these tools are fully integrated in the notarial daily practice. Together with this accumulated long experience, other new innovative technologies are being incorporated, such as the qualified electronic signature in the cloud, or the extraction of the hash function for some documents used since 2019 in mortgage loans for housing procedures.
Great, thank you, Alvaro, there for your response. Christian, I'd like to bring you back in here now, and we're hearing about all these fantastic projects and digital tools being implemented. But I just wondered, I mean, you published your mapping exercise last week along with the new initiatives. What does this mapping exercise tell us about perhaps the need to better harmonise digital processes for notaries across the European Union? And I refer earlier again to your comment about the importance of cross-border collaboration in this field.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to underline and thank for the support of the Council of Notaries of the European Union for contributing to this stock-taking exercise that took place this year during the months of July and August, and that offered the possibility for the Commission to build this staff working document that was not only the result of this survey, but also the result of collecting data from another about 15 studies of high profile. The progress indeed in terms of digitalization is uneven, not only between professions or between areas of judiciary, but also between member states. So, for instance, I would just like to focus on what we were able to see with your help at the level of notaries. So in only 3 member states, notaries were able to fully exercise normal job activities when working from home or from remote, when teleworking. In 9 member states, it was indicated that the notaries are only capable of doing so for certain aspects, and in 4 member states, notaries are limited in teleworking, and in 2, they are even unable to exercise their professional functions remotely. With regard to having the possibility to electronically provide clients with legally binding documents, the notaries in 7 member states are able to do so in all situations, and in 3 member states in the majority of the situations. So you see, here it's already very encouraging. In 2 member states, notaries are able to provide citizens with documents via electronic channels only in specific situations, while in 6 member states, they are currently not able to do so at all. So as you see, the picture is very, very uneven. However, there are already projects, there are already advancement of technology that shows that it's possible to go further and even faster. The example of France was studied by the European Commission, and it's a very convincing exercise in digitalization. We are also looking at annuary databases like Find a Notary, which is part of the e-justice portal, and this is also a very important element of cross-border interaction. Imagine you are in Belgium, you want to buy a property, and you would like to have a notary that also speaks your native language. Find a Notary offers this possibility. Of course, with digitalization, we might arrive someday to the part where you do not have to be physically in that country, for instance, to be able to produce a document or to buy a house or to do other elements that now requires you to go from one country to the other.
Thank you very much, Christian, there. I can see on our screen that we're very fortunate enough as well to be joined by the President of Notaries of Europe, Georgios Rouskas. Georgios, I hope you don't mind. I'd like to bring you in here maybe to make a couple of comments on perhaps the importance of achieving greater harmony in terms of digitalization in the notary world and how the coronavirus crisis has accelerated that need.
Ευχαριστώ και εγώ. Ευχαριστώ τους εκλεκτούς συναδέλφους προέδρους, συνεργάτες λοιπόν στο Διοικητικό Συμβούλιο του CNUE. Αλήθεια είναι ότι κατά τη διάρκεια της κρίσης της πανδημίας μας επηρέασε και μας οδήγησε ποια θα είναι η ψηφιακή συμβολιογραφική εποχή. Να θυμίσω την ελληνική εμπειρία. Μερικά χρόνια νωρίτερα, λοιπόν, η πατρίδα μου, η Ελλάδα, αντιμετώπισε πολύ μεγάλα δομικά, οικονομικά προβλήματα. Με αφορμή αυτά τα προβλήματα έγινε και η προσπάθεια να αλλάξει το οικονομικό και το νομικό ελληνικό σύστημα και να ακολουθήσει για χάρη της οικονομικής εξέλιξης και σωτηρίας την αγγλοσαξονική λογική. Είχαμε δηλαδή μια ουσιαστική προσπάθεια να αλλάξουν και οι κοινωνικές και οι νομικές σχέσεις. Γι' αυτό θεωρώ και θεωρούμε σαν Ένωση Ευρωπαίων Συμβολιογράφων και είναι απόλυτα σωστό για το ποιος θα έχει τον έλεγχο αυτής της ψηφιακής διαδικασίας και ειδικότερα της συμβολιογραφικής ψηφιακής μετάβασης. Είναι εξαιρετικά σημαντικό. Σίγουρα υπάρχει πολύ μεγάλη πίεση για να έχουμε αποτελέσματα και μάλιστα οικονομικά αποτελέσματα. Από την άλλη πλευρά θα πρέπει να είμαστε εξαιρετικά προσεκτικοί για το πώς θα διαχειριστούμε αυτή την συγκεκριμένη πρόκληση. Σίγουρα δεν μπορούμε να αφήσουμε τις εξελίξεις να μας οδηγήσουν σε λανθασμένες επιλογές. Από την άλλη πλευρά θα πρέπει να ασκηθεί οπωσδήποτε ουσιαστικός έλεγχος. Η ζωή μας οδηγεί ότι οφείλουμε να είμαστε δίπλα από τους συμπολίτες μας και στους πελάτες μας. Η ποιότητα της υπηρεσίας μας είναι αυτή που μας ξεχωρίζει από τις άλλες νομικές συγκεκριμένες υπηρεσίες. Αυτή την ποιότητα, την οποία διαχρονικά την προσφέρουμε στους Ευρωπαίους πολίτες, είμαστε υποχρεωμένοι να την προσαρμόσουμε στην σημερινή δύσκολη ψηφιακή εποχή. Δεν μπορούμε να αποποιηθούμε τις ευθύνες μας. Συγκεκριμένα, αλήθεια είναι ότι σε όλες τις χώρες υπάρχει πίεση για την σύνταξη συμβάσεων από απόσταση. Δημιουργούνται όμως και φοβίες. Άκουσα και ήταν εξαιρετικές οι επισημάνσεις ότι δημιουργούνται συμβολιογραφίες και υπηρεσίες διαφορετικών ταχυτήτων. Άλλες χώρες είναι εξαιρετικά μπροστά. Άλλες χώρες είναι εξαιρετικά επίφοβες και έχουν μια πολύ μεγάλη καχυποψία. Όμως η κατάσταση μας οδηγεί στην λήψη συγκεκριμένων αποφάσεων. ότι είμαστε υποχρεωμένοι να υλοποιήσουμε τις αλλαγές, να έχουν την συμβολιογραφική σφραγίδα αυτές οι αλλαγές και οπωσδήποτε να έχουν και τον συμβολιογραφικό έλεγχο. Υπάρχουμε γιατί είμαστε απαραίτητοι στην κοινωνία και στην ψηφιακή εποχή θα υπάρξουμε γιατί οι ίδιες οι κοινωνίες μας έχουν απόλυτα ανάγκη για να καλύψουν τις δικές τους ιδιαιτερότητες. Μην ξεχνάμε ότι ασχολούμαστε με τα ατομικά δικαιώματα, με τις οικογενειακές σχέσεις, με το εμπράγματο δίκαιο και με τα ιδιοκτησιακά δικαιώματα. Αυτός είναι και ο ουσιαστικός μας ρόλος, να αποφασίσουμε και να υλοποιήσουμε με όσο το δυνατόν την μεγαλύτερη σύνεση τη νέα ψηφιακή εποχή.
Thank you, Georgios. We should stand by our clients and embrace change, is the message there from the President of Notaries of Europe, Georgios Rouskas. I'd like to take the opportunity now to turn to our high-tech control room here in Brussels and maybe bring in some of the questions from the audience. So maybe if I could turn to our control room briefly and see if there are any pressing inquiries from the audience at the moment. Nothing at the moment, but remember you can send your questions in using the Q&A functionality on the Zoom platform. Jens, I want to turn to you and talk about electronic archiving processes, particularly in Germany, where notaries have built up their capacities in this regard for some time. But of course, also in Germany, we are well aware that the privacy lobby is perhaps the most active in Europe. And the archiving of very personal data is, of course, open to a series of risks. How do notaries ensure that such risks are mitigated in their work with digital systems and specifically archiving technologies?
We have built up, in fact, archive for our for our deeds, where all deeds will be stored, not only the deeds which will be done in an electronic way, but also the deeds which will be done or are done in a conventional way. And this archive is rather special. Why? Because we don't have just one database, but we have a kind of individual, you could say, bank box for every deed. So each notary submits the deeds in an encrypted way to this archive, and then they are stored there again in encrypted boxes. And to these encrypted boxes, only the notary has access who submitted the deed or his successor or whatever entitled person. Of course, we can make such deeds and documents available to the clients. We can provide them with access to these documents, but the notary has to authorize this access. And the idea to keep these virtual boxes for each deed was vital. To get acceptance for this project in Germany. I know that many of our European colleagues have archives for a number of years, but in Germany we had to meet especially high security standards in order to make this project acceptable for politicians and for the general public. We try to bring in military technology. I think we have the same tools which are otherwise used by the Pentagon or other military institutions, and we really try to guarantee a very high level of safety. And this basically enabled us to convince German politicians and German data protection agencies to accept this project.
Fascinating there, the same tools as the Pentagon. I wonder how the European digital sovereignty point comes into that element of the discussion there. Merle, when we're talking about specific technologies here, of course, Estonia is highly regarded for its electronic identification program, and it allows citizens to access vital public services maybe when their physical presence can't always be guaranteed. At the European level here in Brussels, we're expecting the Commission to come forth with a European electronic ID proposal in the first half of 2021. How could such schemes help notaries in their day-to-day work, from your experience?
It is true that in Estonia, almost all public services are offered online, with the exception of getting married or divorced, perhaps. Since April this year, even real estate transactions can be notarized remotely, thanks to our new remote authentication project. Regarding the foreigners, Estonia has already made its digital ID available for the foreigners under e-residency program, which combined to our remote authentication tool makes it already today possible for the notaries to conveniently sign transactions electronically with foreign clients. But since Estonian notaries do not only rely on person's digital ID to identify a person, but during the video call also compare the person's face with his or her photo in the database as in a normal face-to-face meeting. The new EU-wide tool for e-identification should also enable the notary to have access to the photo of the electronic ID holder, as well as check the validity of the electronic signature. In that way, it might even further simplify the lives of the EU citizens who need to deal with Estonian notaries and enable Estonian notaries to offer our services to a larger number of people. But however, it must be kept in mind here that Estonian notaries authenticate the transactions the object of which is registered in Estonia, for example, real estate or a share of a company, and to which Estonian law applies. And the Estonian notaries generally do not know the law of foreign countries and cannot apply it. Thank you.
Very interesting. Well, we'll have to see early on next year if this proposal for a European electronic identification system will be of use to the notary sector. I've been told by our high-tech control room here in Brussels that we have a question that's come through on the Zoom platform. So perhaps I could bring in our question now from the audience.
Oui, nous avons effectivement une question adressée au président du notariat français. Concernant la possibilité, dans un proche futur, de réintroduire l'acte à distance de façon généralisée et permanente. Est-ce que ce serait une option?
OK. David, la parole est à vous.
Oui. Cet acte par comparution à distance, il a été fait de manière généralisée, mais limitée aux procurations authentiques pour l'instant. Alors, pourquoi est-ce qu'il a été limité aux procurations authentiques? Ce n'est pas le souhait du notariat, même si cette décision nous convient tout à fait dans un premier temps de limiter aux procurations. C'était le souhait du ministère de la Justice, parce que le ministère de la Justice voulait se donner au moins une bonne année d'expérimentation pour avoir un retour d'expérience sur la sécurité du procédé. Il faut bien voir que pour la question de l'identification, elle répond à des critères extrêmement précis. On ne peut pas considérer que l'identification peut se faire, en tout cas en France, uniquement en comparant la photo d'identité de la personne qui est en face de nous, parce qu'on considère que lorsque un client comparaît à distance, ce n'est pas comme s'il était derrière une vitre. Le client qui comparaît à distance se trouve dans un monde dématérialisé. Et dans un monde dématérialisé, il faut des outils numériques qui sont de nature à vérifier si la personne que l'on a en face de vous, non seulement son identité est correcte, mais si c'est une vraie personne également. Car aujourd'hui, des pirates informatiques, sur le risque cyber, sont capables de créer des hologrammes qui ressemblent à s'y méprendre à un être humain. Donc le système d'identification doit permettre de vérifier non seulement l'identité de la personne, mais également la présence d'un véritable être humain en face de nous. Donc le fait de limiter à la procuration permet surtout de limiter les risques importants d'un acte authentique par comparution à distance, car la personne qui comparaîtra devant nous, en fait, donne mandat à une autre personne pour signer à sa place, ce qui réduit quand même considérablement le risque. Et puis aussi, c'était la possibilité, une fois qu'on aura eu ce retour d'expérience dans l'année qui vient, de permettre au notariat français de se doter d'un outil de signature électronique et d'identification qui soit propre à la profession, comme pour notre système de visioconférence, un système qui soit hébergé, contrôlé par le notariat et qui soit soumis à la loi française. Et donc ça devrait être en principe réalisé au cours de l'année 2021.
Thank you, David, for your intervention there. And of course, it's very interesting indeed to hear about the types of things France is doing in terms of developing its electronic ID system. And it strikes me that we're kind of seeing a patchwork of different European electronic ID systems emerge across the bloc now. So hopefully the Commission's attempt to harmonise this whole framework will be very useful indeed when it's presented early on in 2021. Well, we are rapidly running out of time, unfortunately. We could talk about this for the next few hours, but before we go, I'd like to turn back to our panellists to deliver some short closing statements. And first, for his summary, I'd like to turn back to the Commission's Christian Nicolaou. Christian.
Thank you very much, Samuel. I think from what we were also able to hear today, there are many initiatives in digitalization, some of them which are very advanced and I would say even very mature. Others are still trying to find their best pattern. Of course, eIDAS was a first step. Now, improving eIDAS would be the other one, because some of the progress can only be in an iterative manner. But what is important to keep in mind is that the benefits of digitalization can be fully reaped only if all elements of the judicial procedures are digital. No one can be left behind. So the current crisis, by introducing the social distancing measures, also forced us to think and rethink processes. We had a digital approach to the way we were doing our activities, and the true digitalization cannot be achieved only by scanning paper procedures. We have to redesign the judicial system starting from today's reality and from the technological advancement. And if there is a benefit that can be drawn after this crisis, is that everybody was pushed to have a technological advancement, to go to the fore of what we have now in terms of technology, in terms of benefits. And imagine, for instance, because earlier on we were discussing about anti-money laundering, how would this very nocive process can be stopped by using, for instance, artificial intelligence methodologies. But for that, we need to have data, and data in a machine readable format. So we need digital data also to be able to tackle these aspects. Of course, AI can be used for progress as well. So we don't have to look only at the negative things. So all in all, I think we are, as President von der Leyen said, looking at Europe's digital decade. So we have to make the most of it.
Thank you, Christian. And of course, as part of this digital decade plan, the European Commission will be laying out its digital compass with a series of benchmarks for 2030. And I can tell you that we are all waiting in anticipation for those targets. So thank you very much for joining us here today, Christian. I'd now like to turn to Alvaro. Thank you. I'd now like to turn to Alvaro for his closing statement. The microphone, Alvaro. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
We can indeed, yes.
Yes, thank you. Very shortly, as time is almost over, I share the view of Mr. Nicolaou. I think the advantages of digitalization outweigh the inconvenience, but we should be aware of the challenges and of the risks, be very prudent in dealing with it in the next years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alvaro. We should be aware of the challenges and the risks is the key message there from our Spanish representative. David, I'd like to turn to you for your closing statement, please.
En deux mots, j'observe, au vu de tout ce qu'on vient de se dire, qu'on avance tous dans le même sens et qu'on a tous le même objectif, mais en empruntant des chemins peut-être différents. Et je pense que ce n'est pas grave d'emprunter des chemins différents à partir du moment où on arrive tous à se retrouver au même endroit à la fin. Et je pense que ces différents chemins seront peut-être d'ailleurs complémentaires. Et il y a une chose sur laquelle nous devons peut-être travailler de manière beaucoup plus unie et de manière beaucoup plus uniformisée, c'est celle de l'identification. L'enjeu principal dans un monde numérique, c'est l'identification et c'est ce qu'il y a de plus compliqué à réaliser de manière véritablement sécurisée. Le reste des outils, ce n'est pas très compliqué d'y arriver, mais l'identification sécurisée reste la marche la plus difficile à franchir et surtout la plus difficile à franchir de manière unifiée au niveau européen. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much there, David, for your closing statement. Secure identification is the most pressing issue in the field of digitalisation of the judiciary. I'd like to turn now to Merle Saar Johansson for her closing statement.
For the conclusion, I want to say that, as it was mentioned, it's essential that the notary has to be close to the customers. And for now, I have applied the remote authentication since February. It's already almost 10 months. And for those who are still hesitating, I can affirm that remote authentication can replace the physical meeting, and the notary can be close to the client also remotely if the quality of technological solutions is excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Merle. The concept there that remote authentication can bridge that physical gap that we often have with our notaries is a key one that I'm sure will remain pertinent as Europe further digitalises its notary services. And Jens Bormann, I'd like you to deliver your closing statement now, please.
Well, I can only join my predecessors and especially my French colleague, David Ambrosiano. I think we have to continue. We have to get more digital. We have to develop new technologies. We have to be very open and we have to, invent new procedures. But at the same time, we have to remain human. We have to keep close to our clients and we have to offer individual advice and individual solutions, even in the digital world. So I would say, stay human, be digital, and act in the European spirit. That would be my concluding remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jens. Act in the European spirit, develop digital tools, but maintain that human-centric approach is the message from our German representative here. And that brings us to the end of today's session. A big thank you from all of us here in Brussels, and many thanks to our panellists as well for joining in with what has been a fascinating discussion. I hope you've all enjoyed it as well at home.